Welcome back, Social 30. It's so great to see you. Today we're going to learn about economics, and more specifically, economics in Germany during the Nazi regime. I can see that you guys in class today, you're like, man, I'm going to rewatch this because this is going to be amazing. So after today's lesson, I'm hoping that you'll be able to understand better what the domestic and foreign economic policy of Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party looked like. Now, how might you be tested on this? To be honest, you're very unlikely to see this in multiple choice at the diploma level. Aside from some of the economic conditions that helped lead to the rise of Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party. So we've seen questions like that before, as you've seen in the sample booklets. But we don't often test you on Hitler's economic policies once his party's in power from 1933 up to 1945. Having said that, it could be a part of your Part A of your diploma exam. So on the Part A, you might see some sources that in the context of them are about German economics. Again, I have to say that that is mostly unlikely, but it's possible, but not probable. Lastly, you could end up using this as an economic case study in an essay. That maybe your essay is going to defend the position that an ideal economy will be like what Hitler did. Good luck defending that, because a lot of people don't use Hitler as the, this is what we want to do. But maybe you'll do that. Or maybe you'll find nuances of what worked here. Maybe you'll pick and choose some stuff that did work for them that you could include in your economic model. And looking at the title of today's lesson, the Nazi economic, and I have to say, I mispronounced this word, miracle. So I don't know if I just did it right. I don't want to do it again because I might do it wrong. But even in the name, you can see that there's this idea that, something amazing that did happen. It was a miracle. So if it is a miracle, am I saying it right? Absolutely not. If it was a miracle, if it was like this ta-da moment economically, then maybe there is something here that you could put into an essay saying this is an ideal economic system. So a little bit of background. We need to look at, some of the successes that the Weimar Republic had. Now, when I say Weimar Republic, I'm not talking about Hitler's Germany. I'm talking about the Democratic Republic in between the Treaty of Versailles and the rise of Hitler. But more important than the successes they had, to really get us to the main part of today's story, the Hitler part, was the failures. So in 1923, we've talked about hyperinflation, 4.3 trillion Reichsmarks to the US dollar by November of 23. We also talked about debt and the fact that they had to borrow money from the Americans to pay the French and the British. But once the Americans stopped loaning that money, then their international debt became an issue. But also with the Great Depression, we see a collapse of their economy. They don't have a lot of ability to export. And the main problem that'll help Hitler rise to power then will be that unemployment of 6.1 million German people. So knowing that that's the main economic problem that he's facing, then we should assume that in his new economic policy, his new plan, that he's going to have some kind of solution to employment. How is he going to create jobs? So that's going to be something we can look for. In a nutshell, big picture, what we're going to see here is two different phases. One phase from 1933 to about 1936, 1937, and then a second phase after that where it becomes more obvious that their economy is geared towards a war economy, getting prepared for war. It's the first phase that people see more success in, some of that economic miracle. Broadly speaking, Hitler saw an economic policy. His economic policies were meant to serve his military aims. So as a background for everything they're doing economically, why is Hitler doing it? So that he can fulfill his foreign policy desires. And his foreign policy desires, Lebensraum, living space, right? He'd like to see Germany find their place in the sun, bust out through blood and iron of their artificial confines in Central Europe, to get back the land that has been stolen from them through the Treaty of Versailles, and to fulfill their social Darwinistic, natural selection, elitist, manifest destiny of controlling Europe. So we'll see some of that. So we begin with the stage one, the new plan, beginning in 1933. And this is where we have an individual I need to introduce you to. His last name is Scheidt. I think I mispronounced it, didn't I? Schacht? Schacht. Schacht. And Schacht was internationally acclaimed. So he had a lot of credibility. And that's why Hitler makes him his Minister of the Economy and the President of the Reichsbank. So it's going to be Schacht that is going to direct the economy. So this is interesting, just as an aside. You think of Adolf Hitler, you think of a totalitarian. But he's a dictator, yes, but he doesn't always dictate. He has someone else guide the economy early on. In 1933, it's going to be Schacht that is going to direct the economy. So in Hitler's Germany, unlike Stalin's USSR, Hitler does use other members of his party. He allows them to have their, bureaucratic hands-on. So it is an interesting leadership. And you guys were meant to read about that yesterday, about how at times Hitler was the dictator that didn't dictate, that he allowed others to guide. So Schacht wasn't even a Nazi. He's a Nazi sympathizer, yes. He's a conservative, but he's not a Nazi. And he's in a key position here to guide the economy. Why is he the guy? Because he's internationally acclaimed. So what does he do? What does he accomplish? Well, his main goal is going to be create jobs, produce cheap consumer goods. So Hitler promised to create jobs for the 6.1 million people who are unemployed due to the Wall Street crash. And that's going to be one of the goals of this new plan. So in 1933, we have FDR's New Deal. In 1933, in Germany, we have Schacht's new plan. What is he going to do? How is he going to create jobs? Hopefully, you're excited and you're like, let's find out. He's going to tighten government control over foreign currency. So he's going to try to control what can be imported. We can't allow the German currency to have a net outflow. We need to hang on to our currency and use it to purchase things necessary to rebuild our economy, including militarization. So he's going to put in tight government control over imports and over foreign currency. He's going to promote labor-intensive businesses. And we're going to see a very creative international trade agreement with the Balkans. So those are some things to look for. How do we know he was successful? Well, German production is going to increase by 50% in the first 2 years. So at a time when in America they're still struggling with the New Deal and seeing the economy still suffer with the Great Depression, it was recognized globally that Germany was pulling out of the Great Depression first. As an aside, the Soviets never entered into the Great Depression because of the command economics of Gosplan. They never suffered the Great Depression. But of those countries that went into the Great Depression, Germany's the first one out because of Schacht's new plan. Production goes up 50%. He has nearly full employment by 1936. So one of the main reasons people began to support the Nazis politically, democratically, they would vote for the Nazis, they wanted a job. So by 1936, they had nearly full employment. So this is the miracle part. This is the idea that maybe things are working here. But Schacht will be fired in 1937 because he's not a Nazi. And because by 1937 Hitler's saying, I want our economy to become a full war economy, we need to be prepared for war, and that wasn't what Schacht's vision was. So we're going to look a little further at Schacht and his new plan so that we can understand the miracle that was the first 3 to 4 years of the Nazi rule economically in Germany. It is all part of Gleichschaltung. So Gleichschaltung was this Nazification of Germany. So what he's doing economically is a part of a bigger umbrella of Gleichschaltung, of the Nazi party trying to Nazify, right? To make every part of German society fit into the Nazi party, the Nazi vision. So I just put in that as an aside. We've already talked about how Schacht was a conservative, not a Nazi, but a Nazi sympathizer, that he was internationally known and hugely respected, that his issue that he needed to deal with was unemployment and a bit of an unbalanced international trade. And we'll see more about how he does it. He was the president of the Reichsbank, the minister of economics. One thing that he's going to do is he's going to create some MFEO bills, MEFO bills. And what is a MEFO bill? You might be like, okay, you've lost me here. Well, it's because there's the German word here, and maybe you can see it. It's super long, and I mean, if I can't pronounce Schacht, am I going to be able to pronounce Metallurgical Forschungsgesellschaft? I don't think I can pronounce that. Anybody in here speak German? I absolutely nailed it. So we're going to call them MEFO bills, and in an essay you could just call them MEFO bills. What is a MEFO bill? It's like an IOU. It's an IOU. It's very creative, right? So in order to grow the economy, to stimulate the economy, he needs to encourage business to promote jobs, right? Hire. So how is he going to promote that? He's going to use private businesses to build, state projects like the Autobahn. But he's going to pay them with an IOU. He's going to say, hey, we need you to build the Autobahn. We need you to do these government contracts, but we're going to pay you in 4 years. So we're going to benefit from it now because you're creating jobs. And I'm going to pay you in 4 years once the economy's rebounded and the government has the money to pay you. So Schacht is using the industrialists. They understand, the Nazi party understands, that in order to achieve our objectives, the capitalists, the industrialists, are a group within our society that we need on our side. So we are going to create work for them, but we need something back from them, and it's this idea that, can we pay you later? It's an IOU. We'll pay you in 4 years. So this will help unemployment fall from 6.1 million down to 2.7 million within a year. So that's a bit of the miracle. And it's going to allow them to do something called deficit financing without seeing some sudden inflation. So it's deficit financing, meaning we're spending more money than we have as a government. That's deficit financing. But it's deficit financing, but we're not going to create inflation by pouring all the money into the economy at once. If they just paid these industries, these industrialists in 1933, the cost of the Autobahn and stuff, it may have just created inflation. They already had inflation 10 years before. They don't want to go back to that. So they don't want to pump too much money into the economy too soon. So they're going to delay paying for what they're building so that there's not a sudden inflationary spiral. It's very creative. Very creative. So some of these employment schemes included the Autobahn. Now the Autobahn is going to serve more than one purpose. It's infrastructure that will help an economic purpose. It'll help move goods and services around. And again, the Autobahn is still the marvel of Europe in terms of highways. But at the same time, the Autobahn, in Hitler's view, he's looking at it and he's like, I can use that later to move troops around. I can use the Autobahn to move troops so that I can invade the East. So even though the Autobahn has an economic purpose, it also has a future military purpose. They're also going to pay people to regrow forests with afforestation. When you fly over Germany even today, it's amazing how much of Germany still is forested. Much of that forest is a part of the legacy of the Nazis, that they invested in reforesting Germany. Public buildings, similar to FDR's New Deal. Let's build the infrastructure we're going to need for our economy once it rebounds. Let's build schools and hospitals and post offices and other government buildings that, if we invest in now, we'll be using for years and maybe decades to come. A lot of the infrastructure, though, was later essential for rearming. Keep in mind that this economic miracle is happening at a time where not every country is enjoying the same recovery. Now we're going to take a quick leap to a link to a Wikipedia site, because how did they get the people on board? Promising them jobs is one thing, but they also started talking about Strength Through Joy program. Strength Through Joy. So included in the Strength Through Joy program, the Nazis would introduce incentives to work, like holidays, like the Volkswagen. So the Volkswagen Beetle was created by Ferdinand Porsche to be an incentive for workers. Here's the people's car, and if you work, you can save up and buy a car. We saw what the Ford Model T did for the economy in the United States in the 1920s. People wanted a car, right? A car in every garage, a chicken in every pot. That demand for a car grew the economy in America in the 20s, while the Germans are trying to create some growth in their economy by giving them an incentive. And even if they're not going to fulfill the promise of the Beetle to all the people, it gives the people a motivation to work. So there's other motivations happening here for the German people, more than just, hey, you know what, we're going to give you a job. We're going to give you a job. We're going to provide this idea of vacation in southern Germany, so the tourist industry is going to see a big boost. And the people's car was a big part of creating a new dream for the people. So that program was called Strength Through Joy. And there's other leisure activities included as well. So firstly, let's get full employment. And once you have full employment, there might be a feedback loop where now there's more demand, and maybe that'll grow the economy. That's going to create some problems, though, within the Nazi Party, because now they're going to have a debate internally, guns or butter. Now that we have people working and they're making some money, do we want them to be shaping the three basic economic questions and saying, we want butter? Hitler's sitting back and saying, no, I want guns. My goal of being here is so that we can invade Poland, so we can invade France, so we can create Lebensraum, and every Volkswagen Beetle that we make is one. It's probably not a 1-to-1 ratio, but it's less tanks than we can make. So there is going to be a problem. Employment actually creates a problem, because employed German people begin to demand butter, and Hitler's wanting to make more guns instead. So there's going to be some internal problems with that within the New Deal. So there is pressure on Hitler in 1930, by 1934, to begin to look for butter for the people. But Hitler is going to try to keep wages low. So part of the new plan is also an attack on labor in Germany. So he's going to attack unions, and he's going to really side with industrialists and say, let's keep paying your workers less so that we don't have so much demand for butter in the economy. And the industrialists, they'll be happy with that. Often what they were up to at this time was also rearmament in disguise. So sometimes the German government would have a contract for tractors, but really they're building tanks. As a condition of the Treaty of Versailles, the German military was very limited in size and also in makeup. There's some weapons they weren't allowed to have. So until Hitler had the military capable of defying the international agreement, the conditions of the Treaty of Versailles, you had to do some of this rearming in disguise. So a part of this military buildup, this economic miracle, was a military buildup that was happening, but happening in disguise. So they give contracts for for tractors, but it was actually tanks. So one thing that they're going to find out is that in order to fulfill these contracts for tanks, they need some of the raw materials that simply Germany didn't have enough of. But if they purchase these from Britain or France, then that might cause a net outflow of money. Even if the British and French think that, oh, well, these parts are just for tractors, even if they can continue the lie, they'll still see German money leaving Germany. So they need another solution. How can we get the building blocks for rearming without seeing our wealth just flow out of our country? So again, a part of the miracle is Schacht is going to go down to these new Balkan countries, countries like Yugoslavia, and he's going to negotiate foreign trade that will have no net negative impact on his wealth. What they do is they go back to bartering. We need these pieces to rearm. Here's pieces in trade. I can't pay for them in US dollars. We need as many US dollars as we can possibly hold on to. I can't even pay for them in our German Reichsmark. We need to hang on to our currency. I can't pay for them in convertible gold or anything like that. What I can pay for them in is, commodities that we have in excess of. So we need a barter. So they end up using bartering very creatively to prevent a net outflow of wealth. These are things that we need from you so we can rearm, but we can't pay for them in gold or US currency or even our currency. We need to hang on to that. What we can do is we can give you some of our surplus production. So that's a part of the miracle as well. Because one of the issues they had was unbalanced trade. So we have lots of supplementary notes in here. But what we end up getting to is Hitler wants autarky. He wants self-sufficiency. He doesn't want foreign trade. And we get to a point where Schacht says, in order to continue to grow the economy, we need foreign trade and we need to allow more butter to grow the economy. So Hitler and Schacht continue to have this guns versus butter argument. And they also have this argument about how much foreign trade should we allow. And ultimately, Schacht will be dismissed. And the economy will then be organized by one of the leading Nazis, Hermann Goering. And Goering will be told he has 4 years to get Germany ready for the war. So the entire purpose of the economy now will become a war economy. And Hermann Goering is going to do it through what we call the FourYear Plan. So phase 1 was the new plan. Phase 2 is going to be something called the FourYear Plan. And this is basically Germany must be ready to win a war. We have 4 years. Let's get ready for a war. Now, if Schacht is dismissed in 1936-37, depending upon where we timestamp the FourYear Plan, I've seen it time-stamped as 1936. I've seen it time-stamped as 37. What we can agree upon is the German economy wasn't quite ready yet when war begins. World War I begins in 39. The 4-year plan's not done yet. So to some extent, the German economy wasn't ready for the war. So why did the Germans ultimately lose the war? They didn't quite have enough time to prepare for it. So the main thing about the 4-year plan, it's going to be guns over butter. It's going to be about autarky, which means self-sufficiency. We can't, during a time of war, rely upon supply lines. How did Germany lose World War I? Because of a British blockade. British blockaded the continent, and therefore resources that we needed to come in, we couldn't get, and we ended up running low of supplies, and we ended up having to agree to peace. Well, we can't lose the next war because of the same problem. We need to be self-sufficient. We need autarky. So that's a word associated with the next 4-year plan. Now, what are the results of the 4-year plan? Well, there are some successes. German industrial production more than doubled, but there are also some failures. It fails to meet some key targets in oil production. So because of the failure of meeting targets in oil production, Hitler needs to get to the oil fields of southern Russia and the Middle East. So it's going to lead to Operation Barbarossa, which militarily will be his downfall. 80% of the fighting and killing and dying is done on the Eastern Front in World War II. Germany loses the war in Russia and the Soviet Union long before D-Day, right? That it was inevitable that the Red Army would win. So this economic failure of meeting the oil production is key to a failure of Hermann Goering's 4-year plan. Now there's some other critics of the 4-year plan that are included in this document. One of the critics comes from the idea that you cannot, permanently promote guns over butter, because then you'll lose the hearts and minds of the people. This is an article written in 1938, and it's interesting because, although obviously it's not intended, but it ends up showing what ends up happening with the USSR, that the Soviets lose the hearts and minds of their citizens because they had too long promoted guns over butter. So a war economy, guns over butter, is not sustainable long term. You'll lose the hearts and minds of the people. What are some other impacts of Hitler's economics? What about on the German labor front? So, already mentioned, Hitler ended up crushing the unions. He ended up keeping wages artificially low. So he diminishes the value of workers because he needs two groups to fulfill his vision, the industrialists and the army. So he needs to keep the industrialists on his side. So, how did we end up creating this miracle? Well, people ended up working an average of 6 hours more a week. That's not too much. But you'll see in a moment that the standard of living didn't go up as much as you might think. That the standard of living actually declined between 1933 and 39. People were eating less in 37 than they're eating in 27. People had to work longer hours, longer weeks, and as workers they had fewer rights. So when we talk about the economic miracle of Hitler's Germany, I think we need to be selective as to what was the miracle part and what isn't. That for the workers, this is not a miracle. They see their rights being damaged, they're working longer hours, they don't have access to as many consumer goods. So if you're going to use this in an essay, you have to be selective. I think it was creative, the bartering system that they did with the Balkans. I think it was creative, the IOUs that they did with the industrialists to prevent an inflationary spiral, but to grow the economy by creating jobs. So in an essay, you might want to combine some of the Keynesian economics of FDR with some of the benefits of Jacques' new plan, maybe even some of what worked for Stalin. Now let's reconnect to Hitler's goals. We know that Hitler covets his Lebenstraum. He wants to also have this idea of greater Germania by reuniting the German family, including Austria, the Sudeten Germans, the Germans caught in the Polish corridor, and what was once East Prussia. Here's a little bit more about the impact it had on the standard of living. And then this document ends up kind of looking at it as, in broad perspective, is what we understand about Hitler's economics today correct? How is it successful? Well, unemployment fell from 5.6 million down to like 120,000. Their external debt went down. So because they controlled how much they were importing, their debt went down. Their national income goes up. Interest rates were low. But we have established that this did come at a cost. So that's the general notes I want you guys to have on Hitler's economics.